So recently I had someone send in a pair of Spizzichino hi-hats. They're 14 inches. They're very, very thin. They weigh 749 on the top and the bottom is 787. Both cymbals under 800 grams. They're real wispy and real nice, but we have a problem, namely a giant crack that formed on the top hi-hat and it split all the way up nearly to the bell. So the project I have is to recreate, redux this top hi-hat and get an approximate sound so that this pair can be usable again. Now, Roberto Spizzichino is one of the greatest independent cymbalsmiths that ever lived. He's, in my mind, the godfather of independent cymbalsmithing. He came out of the tradition, he was a drummer, and he came out of the tradition where guys were really looking for that old K sound. And when the old K factory shut down in the 70s, those cymbals kind of dried up, new ones weren't being made, and so everyone was really coveting that old K sound, those handmade cymbals from the Turkish factory. So long story short, Spizzichino worked for UFIT for a little while, and then he went out on his own, and he passed in 2011, and he was making cymbals all the way up until the point of his passing. And his cymbals are incredibly vibey, incredibly unique, and he is known for saying that he doesn't want to make beautiful sounding cymbals. He wants to make ugly sounding cymbals that have soul. And if you've played any Spizzichino cymbals, you know that there's a truth to that. He certainly could make beautiful sounding cymbals. I would argue all of his cymbals or most of his cymbals are beautiful sounding in their own quirky way. So all that to be said, these hi-hats came in cracked. Now it's a very unique kind of crack that indicates something very particular, very specific about the way that he processed this metal. So the crack started out at the edge, and with just a little bit more playing, it continued to split all the way up till about right here. So you can see the crack here, but it continues all the way up to my little Sharpie mark right at the top there. And what this indicates is heat treatment. Spizzichino was known for doing some interesting experiments with trying to artificially age his cymbals. And I've heard stories of how he would put cymbals in ovens and leave them in the oven at 300 degrees for a few hours. And what that would do, it's been explained to me, what that would do is it would melt some of the tin at the grain boundaries. I don't know if that's correct. I'm not a chemist or whatever, but I was told that it melts the tin a little bit, which makes the alloy a little bit more brittle, which then results in a sound that's very similar to an aged old K that's had decades and decades of time. The problem with that, as you can clearly see, is it makes the metal brittle and it can crack. And this kind of crack, I've heard of this kind of crack happening on multiple Roberto hi-hats. And once it starts, there's really not a repair that you can do that will last. I mean, you could scoop the crack out, but the metal is so brittle that it's going to continue on. So the guy sent them to me and said, it happened, and I was really sad, but then my next thought is I'm going to reach out to Timothy Roberts and see if he can make a new top hi-hat for this set. So that's what I've done. I've created two right now, but I'm in a process with this. I'm talking with the guy about maybe a more ongoing process because he has a lot of Roberto Spizzichino cymbals where I'm looking to do my own redux, my own version of that sound. And so to start, rather than just making a single cymbal to pair with this, which would be fairly easy, I wanted to start by making complete sets that are reduxes of the original. They require from me a very particular approach that I'm not used to doing, and I find it very exciting. So let's talk about that now. Now, something that Spizzichino was known for as well is that he would just get into a flow state and he would just make a cymbal. And from what I gather, the stuff that I've played, he didn't really go in and hyper analyze all the little curvatures and correct things and make it all perfect and uniform. He wanted to get into a flow state, make a cymbal, and let it be what it was. let it rest, play it over the course of weeks. He would take it to his gigs. He would ensure that it had a vibe. I've heard that he had whole sections of his workshop that were the rejects, where he just didn't feel like those cymbals really reached the quality he was wanting to achieve. And so he was very, very intentional about making cymbals in an artistic way, letting them be what they are, what they were, playing them, and then the ones that really hit his quality standard he would let out into the world. And I really respect that, and it's not the style that I typically go for. So when I get a Spizzichino in and I pay attention to the shape, I notice that things are intentionally left in a imperfect state or an inconsistent state, but it's intentional. It creates a vibe. It creates a really interesting sound. So with these two sets of hi-hats, I went in and I had that mindset. I was like, I'm just going to make them, I'm going to lay them, and they're done. And I'm going to let them sit, you know, and I'm going to do lathing that's a little bit more like Roberto's lathing, not quite like how I would typically lathe. I'm just going to let them be. And the results, I think, are pretty cool. All right, so to dive into some specifics about the original set, again, Roberto and hooks. I can't tell you how many Roberto Spizzichino cymbals I've played that have a pretty noticeable hook out near the edge. And this is just an interesting way to get vibe into your cymbal. When you have this nice, smooth, uniform curvature that doesn't have any major changes in it from the edge to the bell, you get vibe. It's very hard to tune those cymbals in a way where the tension is masterfully balanced to where above the hook you don't get all these hums and honky weirdness. So this top hi-hat, which I have to mention that the crack is disrupting the tension, so it's kind of twisting a little bit. But with this cymbal, there is a noticeable hook out to here, and then it flattens off. It has, almost like the sound creation, it has a little bit of a trough dip in the center, and then it rises up to the bell. And when I play these things, you know, granted it's cracked, so you're getting a cracked sound from this, but it's very, very interesting. Right now, the sound is mostly coming from that bottom hi-hat because the top hi-hat is dead. It's just not ringing and sustaining like a typical cymbal would. So when I went in to make these cymbals, I started with really thin blanks. I was starting with blanks that were already under 1,000 grams for a 14-inch. And so I did not have a lot of room to lathe, and that was intentional. This metal is over 10 years old now. I know that these cymbals were picked up by the customer in 2011, the year he passed. I don't know when they were made, but they are definitely over 10 years old, at least maybe over 15 years old, depending on how long they sat in Roberto's shop. So that there has been some aging that's happened. Obviously, it has a nice, beautiful golden, like lightly golden brown hue with the patina, and the metal alloy composition's kind of hardened a little bit, And so with that, I wanted to start with blanks that were already pretty thin so that I wasn't doing a lot of lathing, so that the hardened layers up near the surface of the bronze, it would just be a little bit harder than if I was removing 200 or 300 grams from each blank. Now with my cymbals, I took two approaches where one of them was meant to be closer to the weights and the other one was meant to be like a weight class higher. So on this thinner version of mine, you can see mine are much more silver looking, fresh bronze here. But on this thinner version, I have a 785 top and a 788 bottom. So I was really going for a matched weight kind of situation. So the second pair, a little bit heavier, like I said, kind of going for about 50 grams heavier on each cymbal. So I have an 842 top and I have an 850 bottom. Again, trying to match the weights. Now, obviously on the Spizzichino set, it's 749 over 780 something. So that top hi-hat is a little bit thinner. That's another way that when you're reduxing or trying to make a cymbal that's an inspiration from a cymbal that exists, a slight bit heavier can help simulate the goodness that happens with age. So with these, I'm going for that other approach of slightly heavier weights. And I went with the same kind of shape where we have this, a lot of flatness up here to the edge of the bell, and then it hooks out at the edge. And that's on all of them. Very similar to the way this set is. When it comes to the lathing, last thing I'll mention is Roberto's work tended to have these quite sharp grooves that would cut through the metal, and those grooves can give a slightly sparkly, crispy sound to the highs, and then the grooves also cut across each other, and you can see it when it catches in the light like that. And so what I'm doing to achieve that is I've got a carbide bar that I just twist on my lathe so that I'm catching a bit more of an edge, and I'm going fast up and down the cymbal. I can also see with the crack, because it's opened up here, I can see the side profile and I can kind of approximate the taper that it has, which is not much. It tapers at probably the outer ½ inch, but it looks like the thickness is consistent all the way up from about a ½ inch in all the way up to the bell. So I wasn't going for a super tapered cymbal. That's also important for strength when you have a thin set. It's nice to keep things to where you keep the thickness somewhat uniform and really only taper the outer edge. That can be a good way of doing it. So I'd love to know what you think about my version next to the Spizzichino version. I'll say it again, I've said it a bunch of times, this is not meant to be a clone, not meant to be a perfect copy or a replica or whatever that you hear a lot in the cymbal industry. This is a redux. This is my take on the classic Roberto sound. From here, I'm going to go into making an individual hi-hat that's meant to pair with the bottom, which is uncracked, good to go. And from what I can tell, I might be wrong, but from what I can tell, this is not a heat-treated cymbal on the bottom. I believe he only heat-treated the top. Can't be sure on that, but I'm noticing some slight little color variations on the top versus the bottom. It's giving me an indication that maybe these weren't made at the same time, or maybe they weren't made in the same way in terms of that last step of heat treatment. All right, so let me know what you think in the comments below. Like the video, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, share it if you dig it, and if you like Roberto's work, give it a thumbs up. We'll see you guys next time. I'm Timothy Roberts. Thanks for watching.